back to you. Okay, we're live. Meeting is yours, Mr. Chair. Let me know if you need anything.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the Special Planning Commission meeting of May 20th, 2021 to order. Will you please do a roll call with your state?
Magro,
Milford here.
Kashkarian,
Milford here as well.
Davis,
Sorry, I'm unmuted. Milford.
Rishka,
Here in Milford.
DeVry,
Here in Milford.
Mazzaro,
Here in Milford.
Latka,
Here in Milford.
Mallon,
Here in Milford.
and Gilo.
Here in Milford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have a full quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written, with the exception of, oh, wait a while, it's already gone. All right, never mind. Approve the agenda as written.
I
So
moved.
Do I have a second?
Support.
Who approved?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Everybody. Let's just pick you, Dave. We'll say that you approved and Bill seconded. I'm not going to do a roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously. At this time, I'd like to call for public comment. If there's anybody out there in the public, please, what do they do? Push *9?
Yes. Press *9 to raise your hand. We don't have any callers at the moment.
Okay, well then, having no public in attendance, I'll move on to the audit of ordinances and clear zone information presented by Geffelson Webster. Is that going to be you, Cherie?
Yes.
Okay, I will turn the meeting over to you.
Can you see the screen?
Blank.
Say again?
Screen is blank. We see blank.
It's blank.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened. I was kicked out and then I had to come back again. Brian, I don't know. I've attended other meetings. I never had problems sharing screen other places.
We see your screen now.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yes.
Then
But it's
Go ahead.
just-
Let me
it's
know
your
if you need
full-
anything.
Sri, it's your full PowerPoint. Yeah, oh, there you go.
okay. Perfect. Okay. We've included the audit packet for all the Planning Commission to review. We hope you probably got a chance to look at it a little bit. Just wanted to go over briefly the summary of the findings. To start with, when we looked at the audit, these are the 7 items. We kind of check it off to make sure, if the audit is compliant and up to date, clear to understand. Is it reflecting the vision of the community master plan? Is it well structured? Is it clear and easy to understand? Are there illustrations to explain the text? And is it consistent with state and federal law as well? The reason we need to have an audit that kind of follows the general guidelines is so that we can come up with outcomes that are consistent and predictable. The items that are within the blue box are taken care of because we are working on the clear zoning transformation for Milford Township. So when the transformation is complete, we are checking the boxes from 2 to 5. While I was trying to figure out how to explain the purpose and the intent of the audit, the first thing that came to my mind was, when you go to your car service. I did that once. My husband usually does it, but I did that once. And then the serviceman gave me a list of issues that were wrong with my car. I came home and I'm like, we should sell this car. Everything's wrong with it. But then it's the same way, like they do tell you what's wrong with it, but not everything is a priority. You have to prioritize based on what's important, what you need right now. It's the same way with the audit. If you went through the audit, it lists all the points where there is a scope for improvement, where there is a scope for an update, where to keep up with stuff, but we don't have to address every little thing in the next 1 or 2 months. At the end of the session today, our goal is to identify the priority items based on the findings in the audit, and then figure out an implementation plan, how to address those first, and then identify the other items that were also recommended. And just a note before we get into detail that this is a planning level review by certified planners, not a legal review, but we did get input from Jennifer regarding the audit comments, so I'll provide her update as we go. And Jennifer's here as well to provide any update. The way the audit document is organized is that we are doing 3 different types of audit. A master plan, we are checking whether the zoning ordinance is in alignment with the master plan. And then we're just looking at the zoning ordinance in specifically in every section to make sure, are there any conflicts? Is it clear? Are there anything that are not consistent with the industry standards? All those things. And then the third one is a sustainability audit. It's just a high-level picture of whether the zoning ordinance can withstand the current economic or the development patterns, and then the climate changes and all the other sustainable practices. Just a little refresher regarding the interrelation between a master plan and zoning ordinance, because we do refer to master plan and the goals and the principles from time to time when we review the site plans. So the master plan is a document that provides a long-range vision that guides the policy. But the zoning ordinance is the one that provides the legal framework that regulates the development of the property. The zoning ordinance is one of the primary tools for implementing a master plan vision. So sometimes we often find that there are certain principles in the master plan which are not necessarily codified in the zoning ordinance. So we can refer to those principles for general guidelines, but we cannot regulate the development based on principles and master plans. So from time to time, audits and health checkups will help us to make sure that we have the legal framework to achieve the intent of the master plan. As you all know, Milford Township adopted their master plan as a joint effort with the village in 2009, and then we recently did an addendum in 2017. As you know, a master plan, we need to update it every 5 years. So it may not be a bad idea to do the audit every 5 years along with master plan, just so we can make sure that they are complementing each other. So this is And I won't go through the goals, but I just wanted to put the slide in there just to remind the master plan goals from 2009, which were kind of carried over in 2017 with some additional guiding principles. And the audit, the sustainability audit kind of addresses the similar issues, which are the township goals as well. The first section in the zoning ordinance audit talks about the definitions and how you can rephrase them or recategorize them, and adding some clarifications. If we are in a situation where we're trying to figure out how do we interpret this so that it's not left to the person who's reviewing the plan at that moment. The first thing that would come to mind is sometimes there's always challenges how to identify what's front yard when you have a cul-de-sac, or what's front yard when you have a double fronted lot or a corner frontage lot. So it's better to add some clarification in situations like that. The second section talks a little bit about districts and uses, but before we get into the specific districts, this is a general catch-all requirement we see in the ordinance, mostly in the light industrial district, where it provides an option to identify, to permit, to make, for the planning commission to make a determination whether a certain use is similar and less objection to the other uses in the district. It's probably fresh in your mind because we just reviewed 2 applications where they were requesting a use determination recently. But learning from the process and the how we did in the past, we feel like this is one item which would probably require a redo or up to fill in the gaps. We met with the township staff, administration, the attorney, and then a couple of members of the planning commission. And then we all agree that this process is something that needs to be refined and made a little bit more stronger. So before I get into detail, I want to mention that tonight we're not trying to identify the details of every amendment. It's just a high level discussion. So when it comes to use determination, what's on the screen is what we need to address when we actually get into drafting the text amendment. So identifying the process, identifying who's approving what, and submittal requirements, qualifying criteria, and standards of approval and such. I would probably defer to the audit for specific details about these things, but we just went through the permitted list of uses and special land uses for each district, and then made some recommendations in the document where maybe we need to add this use, or maybe we needed to remove these uses because they don't fit anymore, or it doesn't make sense given the area that district covers. Like, for example, golf courses are a permitted use in the mobile home park district, but it's a very small area and golf course doesn't look like a feasible use for that district, for that area. A couple of other general recommendations for other districts. And while reviewing the zoning map and then the districts and the list of uses and amount of area each district constitutes, there were a couple of recommendations made for planning commission consideration. Like, for example, do you think it's a good idea to consolidate the restricted office with C1 because both of them have similar uses and are compatible with the surrounding residential uses? And then maybe do we want to just have M1, 2 different industrial districts, and then once the existing uses are abandoned in M3, we eliminate M3. And then maybe consider eliminating the C2 PUD option under C2, and then just formulate a comprehensive PUD ordinance for the entire township. We'll get to that in a little bit. And we also looked at the flexible development options. Flexible development options that are in the ordinance, and looking at how many areas that could qualify for these options. The audit makes some recommendations in it. Like for residential development, the township has open space preservation, cluster option, and then design flexibility allowances. But the cluster housing is only for single family, open preservation is single family. They all kind of have the same intent. It's just a little bit of difference here and there with regards to the standards of approval. So this is something the Planning Commission may consider, whether if the township hasn't been receiving development proposals under these, then is it worth considering if we should eliminate a few to streamline or consolidate them to streamline the process. The other one was the planned unit development and C2 PUD. And I'm sure the word PUD is ringing in your ears with all the discussion in the past couple of months. And we all are very well understand the difference and then the challenges with one against to the other. So this is another recommendation made in the audit, is that maybe we should just combine those two into one and then just have one process and one qualifying criterion standards of approval, so that there's a clear expectation for the applicant and everybody involved. The next was the dimensional standards. I won't get into detail. We can probably get into detail at, when the Planning Commission discusses or after the end of the presentation. But this section of the audit comments provides recommendations regarding defining setbacks or front yards or the lot coverage requirements, building heights, and setting some density calculations and more. The next section in the audit talks about the development procedures. And Jennifer gave me an update that the Township Attorney's Office is working with the township staff to come up with bylaws to develop bylaws for Planning Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals. The other are certain recommendations just to trying to see if we can make the process quicker for the applicants or streamline the requirements, then identify ways to moving things forward. So one of the recommendation is that maybe for site plan approval, the board, the Planning Commission could be the final approval for permitted use site plans. And then maybe the board could retain authority for all discretionary approvals. So the other are similar suggestions to make things easier and consistent with how things best practices are in other communities as well. The site plan submittal, reducing the need of paper storage. Maybe we can identify, start considering electronic submittals, and then provide some standards for permit extensions and the conditions for such approvals, because it's not unusual for people to get their approvals and then due to something out of their hand, like financial or other reasons, they may not be able to start construction within a year. So it's good to have that flexibility to help developers if that's something the Planning Commission would like to consider. And then unlisted use is something which is not other use similar category, because other uses are typically like if the use is not specifically listed in the ordinance, not in that specific district, but in any specific district, then they could qualify for other unlisted uses. But if there's a use that's specified, like For example, let's say we have a drive-through restaurant. Because we know for sure that it's permitted in a business district, the applicant cannot come and ask for use determination under other similar uses in M1 because it's specifically listed there. But sometimes we may come across some creative uses of land, especially when the township has so many agricultural residential areas where people might be interested in coming up with some farming ideas or farm educational facilities, stuff like that, where we don't have to amend the whole ordinance for very rare specific use, but we have a process to identify what zoning district it fits and how do we go about it. The next section talks about the site and use standards. This is for those uses where you have another layer of standards to regulate to make sure the impacts are less. On this slide, I think maybe the focus, the two main points I would probably focus on are the facade standards and then the lighting standards. The good quality architecture reflects the values of the community. And based on the discussion the Planning Commission had while reviewing the Kensington and the Crossings PUD, I feel like that was a very good discussion with very good points. Maybe we can translate some of that into the ordinance. And then the lighting standard, it's just most of the standards are outdated. It just needs a overall update to keep up with the LED and the sustainable practices out there. This is something the Planning Commission will probably discuss more at a later meeting because this was, it is my understanding that this was discussed at board last week, or this week. And then this is a challenge we have in the township, and this is something we need to be proactive and then figure out where we want to be and how do we get there. Just reviewing the recent use determinations, and then we have so much industrial land, and people often think that just using it for outside storage is requires less infrastructure improvements and then makes use of land, but that necessarily doesn't mean meets the intent of the township. So this is something we need a further discussion to talk about. How do we screen, what's the location, and how do we regulate, and what districts is it allowed and what districts it should be restricted. I mean, what areas within industrial district. The next slide are just examples. Tim was kind enough to take me around the township one of the afternoons. And then I was amazed, blown away by the thick vegetation and the natural vegetation and the dirt roads throughout the community, which are very unique to township. But at the same time, when we pass through certain areas, the industrial areas, the trees are not healthy enough because we don't have robust irrigation standards or landscape and maintenance standards. So there's that disconnect between the beautiful residential areas and then under-maintained industrial areas. So that's something the Planning Commission could consider, providing additional standards to regulate irrigation and maintenance for landscape throughout the township. The next one is the off-street parking and loading. I know township, the majority of the users in the township are residential, but this is something we can take a quick look at to make sure we look at the minimum standards and the layout and design, and then ways to regulate, ways to add more landscape into the site through parking lot landscape requirements. And then the loading size requirements, not every, if just going by the current standards, not every use requires a loading space that is based on the size of the building. So there should be some flexibility included as part of the site plan review process to allow reduction in square footage rather than sending them to the ZBA for a variance, because the size of a loading space is not based on hardship, it's based on the use and the location. The other standards in the audit talks about bicycle facilities and access management and others section. Like I said before, it is just a comprehensive list of what can be improved, but not necessarily everything is a priority. Then we have these two, which I think are could be a priority items as well. The township attorney prepared a memo that talks about the recent case and then the specific changes to the sign ordinance. We reviewed it as well, and we agree with every recommendation in the memo. So that's why we didn't want to repeat the same thing in the audit. So we made a reference to the memo, but I think it's a good one. We should pick it up where we left off and then move that forward. Then the other recommendation is based on my field trip with Tim as well, when we visited the lakefront lots. They are unique, but they have their own challenges with regards to, and then consistent challenges from what I understand with regards to variance requests and complying with the ordinance standards. So rather than sending them to ZBA, because it's a recurring request of similar type, the recommendation is to maybe consider alternate standards to review the lakefront lots. The final one we had a little bit extra focus on is the tree preservation ordinance. I know township did an amendment recently, but there are certain areas where we can make it more robust. And at the same time, simplifying certain requirements. For example, there are some review criteria in there that talks about a lot of detail required, which would require a landscape architect or a consultant to review such standards. So that is something the township could consider and see, maybe do we want to let go of a few things due to the additional time and expense, or do we want to find a way to make that happen? The other recommendations are just alternate options for replacement. I do understand that the developers have so far always picked replacing trees on site, what they removed. So we never had to go through asking for a tree fund money in lieu of replacement. But this is something we could consider, maybe off-site replacement planting if there's no site, there's no place on their site, instead of providing money into a tree fund. Like that's another option in addition to the tree fund. And then requiring irrigation for those replacement plants, because we don't want them to plant them in all over the site and not well irrigated, and the purpose of having replacement planting will become moot at that point because they're not maintained and not tied. The sustainability audit is more objective. It's a very overall, it's just looking at, are the standards in the ordinance can sustain the changes over time, or do we have to keep updating the amendment every time a change happens? And the findings are pretty general, but the recommendation is that if that's something the township is interested in, maybe down the line, we could consider a sustainability plan where we get into those specific factors in more detail and then try to see how we can revise the ordinance based on that. The first thing that definitely probably worth looking at is the stormwater management design to see if we can add standards for low impact development, and then having a sidewalk or a trail plan, which the Planning Commission did discuss at prior meetings. So I know it's on your radar. So I want to end the presentation with just our recommendations to start with for priority items. And then what we're looking from the Planning Commission is to see do you agree with this list? Do you want to add anything to it? Or is there anything else in the audit you feel like you need more background information on? Or is there anything in the ordinance which you thought, oh, this should be updated, but we missed it? So the 6 priority items we've shortlisted is the redoing the planned unit development ordinance. It's not that the existing ordinance is not not, we're not saying that it is not right or it needs a major do-over, but it's just that consolidating those 5 different flexible options into 1 or 2 to have a similar, easy to remember process. Outside storage, that's becoming an issue, and that's the other one, the second priority item, and then having some standards of approval, qualifying criteria for use determinations, and then streamlining the development review process so that everybody understands what is what and how we can make it quicker or easier. And then how do we fill the gaps for communication between everybody reviewing the plan and the applicants. The landscape standards to address the irrigation and the parking lot landscape requirements, and then the sidewalks and trails within the township. So with that, I know if I went fast through the presentation or didn't give it a moment to pause, I can always go back to that slide or pull the audit document to address each in detail. So with that, I'll leave it up to the Planning Commission for discussion, and we're on standby for any questions.
Okay, thanks, Sri. I think what I'd like to do is I would like to ask the various commissioners if they have any comments or questions for Sri at this point in time. Mike, do you have anything that you'd like to discuss or ask? Are you muted, Mike?
Mark? Oh, you said, I thought you said Mike. I was looking around, who's Mike?
I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I mean, I looked at what was put together and it seems like a pretty healthy list to attack. And I do agree with the priorities that were expressed on that last slide. They seem to be good ones.
Okay, thanks, Mark. How about Neil?
I went through the presentation yesterday and today, and what I'm after is what are we trying to achieve with this? I mean, is there a bullet point list and assignments, or what exactly are we trying to achieve?
So the goal is to identify the short-term priority amendments and then long-term priority amendments. And that way we address the immediate items through introducing text amendments one after the other. And then hit the other amendments as we need. So this is the first meeting to discuss audit. We're going to gather input at this meeting and then come up with an implementation plan.
Okay, good.
The bullet points you're looking for with the final version of the audit.
I'd like to at least see what the plan's going to be, who's involved in it, what the deliverables are going to be, and what's the timing. Just a normal approach to a problem.
I think that, yes, that's the goal. That's what we're trying to figure out, get your input so that.
So Sri, if I can just add to that, I think procedurally, Neil, how it would work is the Planning Commission would identify what your priorities are based upon the audit information that has been presented. And then one at a time, you'll have to tackle probably some zoning ordinance amendments. Okay. And so you would do that in your normal fashion, how you handle amendments, and there may be conversations that need to happen with the township board or the administration, but it will probably involve a series of zoning ordinance amendments over a period of time. a long period of time probably, because you're going to prioritize, you know, and you obviously can't do everything at one time.
Right, so that's what I'm after is, how we're gonna develop that plan, what's the timing, and how we'll get to resolution for each one.
Right.
Okay,
All right, thanks, Neil. Julie?
Hi. That is a huge job that you guys did. It was really good, very comprehensive, all of the stuff that needs to be done. The only thing I would add to your last slide as far as priorities would be, and you talked about it a little bit, was the sign ordinance. I know we looked at it a little bit pre-COVID, and then that does need to be worked on. And then my only thought, and this would probably be to the commissioners or to the board or Jennifer, I'm not sure, is in order to get this done in a timely fashion, because I think a lot of this stuff needs to be done kind of quickly, is there any way to have 2 meetings a month so that we can work on these issues in our ordinance and get this up and going at one meeting, and then have our regular like agenda items or, like our projects at another meeting? I'm just not sure if that's possible. I just wanted to float that out there. And then the other question I have is, typically we take a really long time to do ordinance amendments. It goes over months and months and months of work. We nitpick every single little detail. How can we stay on track and not wordsmith things and not nitpick where commas are, in order to get the process going so that we can get this done more quickly? Anyone have, Sri, do you have any advice on what other communities are doing? I just feel like we take a really long time.
We could have, because some priority items require a lot of discussion. So before we even start getting into it, we can have a work session with the Planning Commission and then just get all the points and then present the draft at the next moment. Beyond that, I think if it takes longer, then it depends on the comments coming from the Planning Commission. But I think the work session kind of might be helpful.
Okay. And then Bill, Jennifer, what are the options of having an additional meeting a month to try to get ordinance amendments completed in a timely manner and not get sidetracked with other projects?
I think
So
it'd be
you
good to
could
just
do-
bring that back. You're gonna answer it, Jennifer?
Well,
I think it would
legally,
be-
procedurally, you could, if you're going to do like regular every month, have 2 meetings. Like some communities, their planning commissions always have 2 meetings a month.
Right.
You've already set your regular schedule of meetings for 2021, but you
Right.
could amend your regular schedule of meetings if you're gonna do those double monthly meetings regularly. If not, if you're gonna wait until like you get to a something that you've prioritized, you could do work sessions and they would just be noticed as special meetings. So you just need 18-hour notice for those meetings. So what you could do is when, like Sri was just saying, you're going to pick your priorities. And then when you're ready to tackle one of those priorities and you're going to need to have like a work session to talk about that subject matter, then we could just do a special meeting notice for that work session, which might not necessarily happen every month, but it could happen just by special notice.
Okay.
So you could do it one of 2 ways. If for a while you want to like have permanent twice a month meetings, then we would just change your regular schedule of meetings.
What about subcommittees? The third method.
So
Yeah.
last night at the township board meeting, Commissioner Mazzara brought up setting up and we had talked about this at our meeting, I think it was earlier this week, our administrative meeting, about the Planning Commission setting up an ad hoc committee. You have a couple different options. You could set up an ad hoc committee that is, and we could possibly even address this in your zoning ordinance if it's going to be more like a permanent body, where you would even consider potentially like rotating membership. But it would have its own meetings every month and report to the planning commission as a whole. Or you could just do it an ad hoc committee for your larger projects. Or you could do ad hoc committee for just like the items that you're prioritizing in connection with the audit. Not necessarily something that's going to be a permanent body, but something that's set up to handle these temporary issues. You have a lot of options. And so, and last night we talked about it at the board, the planning commission, you know, needs to decide how you want to structure an ad hoc committee, how often you'd like an ad hoc committee to meet, and how you want them to report to the planning commission.
Bill, did you have something you wanted to say? Bill, there you go.
I was going to go over the fact that it would probably be good to bring that to administration, bring it to the board, and ask them to go ahead with, you know, 2 meetings. If it's a meeting or a work session or however you termed it, we did try to update our master plan, or if you remember, align the zoning map with the master plan, and that took almost 2 years, one issue.
Right.
That was a perfect example of wordsmithing it, I think, for a long time. So I think that would be good. And I think it is necessary to come up with a ad hoc committee that meets like we talked, just 5-10 minutes before the meeting, so that we're brought up to speed, just a few of us, and so that we can explain it to everybody else as to why it's on the agenda. So that's just in response, you know, to that.
Right, well, that was my only, those were my only, the sign ordinance. I don't know however anyone else thinks about that, adding that to that last priorities list. And then the 2 meetings a month, and trying to work things along a little more quickly than we normally do, just to get things going. A couple things are important and need to be done in a more timely manner.
This kind of ties in with that a little bit too, Julie, and Shri and I talked about this earlier today. What the Planning Commission and the Township Board should also discuss is, right now, there aren't any legal requirements or any provisions included in your code for how items go to the Planning Commission. There's this policy that it must go to the Township Board first, but sometimes the administration sends items to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission is just not entirely aware of where that's coming from or why, because of the communication. So we talked about that at our administrative meeting earlier this week about tightening the communication. But one of the things that the Planning Commission might want to look at is, what are the procedures for how things get to the Planning Commission? If they must always go through the Township Board, then it is going to delay your process, because they meet once a month. So you're going to have to, you know, and if it requires a public hearing, that's extending the time. So if there's a way to go through like your ad hoc committee, or even go through the administration, and again, the administration can certainly send stuff to the Planning Commission without going through the Township Board, because there is no legal requirement that the Township Board send stuff to the Planning Commission. You may prefer that, and we can incorporate that in regulations, but it will extend the time frame for getting things accomplished if everything has to go to the Township Board first. Also, things might come to the Planning Commission directly from the ZBA. If the ZBA is having multiple variance requests and needs you to address, you know, fences or accessory structures or something, how does the ZBA get something to the Planning Commission without having to wait for a Township Board meeting so that the Township Board can say that the ZBA issue can go to the Planning Commission? Like, streamline the process of getting projects to the Planning Commission to expedite things like Julie's talking about right now.
That was
So how
one
do we
of the
go about
priority
doing
item.
that? I think we understand, we went over this a couple of times, the issues. Now, what's the action item that we need to do to put this in place, so that we can draw, you know, that together? I heard what you say, but I think it requires, how do we manage this? We do this through a work session? a ad hoc meeting, something, so, because we're just talking about it, but it's a real issue that needs to be resolved on a timely basis.
Yeah, I
So
think you would do
what's the
that in a
plan?
work session. I would suggest a work session to talk about, like, for instance, what the one item that I just mentioned, like, how do we want things to get to the planning commission? That could be a work session topic. You could talk about just how you want to set up your procedures for getting items to the planning commission.
So do we want to set up a list of these items such as, how does things get to the planning commission and call for a work session? Does everybody, I'd like to hear a comment from everybody, not just Jennifer. Does that seem like something that we want to take on and start to do these types of things? And if we decide to do a work session, how many people have the time to do a work session?
Through the chair, if I may.
Well, I'd like to listen to the commissioners first, sir.
Oh, okay.
We're doing a lot of talking between you and Jennifer, and I want to hear the other commissioners. Julie's ideas were very good and very, very on point. But we need to figure out how to accomplish these things. So, we do move slowly. In fact, we do move too slowly, specifically on ordinance-based issues. We, like Julie said, we tend to wordsmith it and move commas around and that kind of thing, which is it's not useful. It doesn't help us get where we want to be. So, do the other planning commissioners have any observations they'd like to make on how we can tackle some of these non-normal meeting agenda item kinds of things, and how we prioritize them and how we start knocking some of these off, because the list is getting long. Dave, you have any comments?
Miles was raising his hand, so I'll let Miles go first.
Okay, Miles. Sorry, man.
Thank you. I have a question for somebody. Is it the intention to make this change reflecting the current ordinance with no changes? Or will the format and changes happen at the same time?
Can I address? So the clear zoning transformation just reformats and reorganizes the existing language and maybe add some graphics and clean up certain terms like changing church to place of worship. But any other additions to the language have to go through the formal text amendment process.
Good. So it'll be a new format, but no changes to the
language
details. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now we'll go to Dave.
Okay, so I agree with Julie that things are dragging, and I think additional work groups or meetings or something like that would be useful. My biggest problem is that I'm struggling to with the time commitment of once a month, let alone even more. So I like the idea of having volunteer members to do some subcommittee work if that's what we want to do, to help do some of that background wordsmithing. I mean, I could do that occasionally, but not on a very regular basis. The other thing that I would like to see is somehow have more direction from either the board or administration or both as to what are the priorities that they really want us to tackle. I like Shree's presentation with outlining what they think needs to be worked on, but I think the board and the administration probably has some really good ideas as to where they would like to see the township go, and especially since the board ends up voting on what we send to them. It would be nice to kind of dovetail and say, yes, we're all walking in the same direction, and we're all trying to fulfill the exact same goals. So I know that the suggestion was to have some subcommittees on the planning commission, perhaps the board could even have some subcommittees so that they could, kind of push through some ideas, without having to wait once a month to offer things up to the planning commission. So that's all of my comments.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Mr. Chair, your ad hoc committee could include members of the planning commission and the township board if you wanted to come up with a committee that could meet so that there's clearer communication between the two bodies. It doesn't just have to be solely including planning commissioners.
I understand that, Jennifer. One of the things I don't want to walk too far away from is what Julie's original point was, in that it's like when you get ready to look over our ordinances, we tend to spend months and months and months trying to wordsmith something which becomes kind of it's problematic because we're not moving fast enough and we're not moving with any precision, and I think that maybe a smaller group or whatever, but I don't want to lose sight of what she said, because it's an important point for us as a planning commission to try to refine our ordinances so they support us better. I mean, we've obviously got some issues right now where we have ordinances that we've been enforcing for 30 plus years that maybe we need to rethink. And I struggle with that because I want to make sure that those kinds of things get priority and those kinds of things get handled right away. So I don't want to lose sight of that. So I want to move on to Vaughn.
I think consistent with what everybody's saying, but you can sort of break it down a bit. I think the first thing we got to decide is what are our priorities in terms of things we need to be looking at. And then I think, we need to establish some targets in terms of how long do we want to take from start to finish to get something through. And by the way, that might vary by what we're dealing with. It might be different for if you're dealing with landscape ordinances versus something else that's more of a major consequence. And that will help then decide what kind of, whether it's ad hoc groups or whatever else that we establish. But I think there needs to be a timing target that's at least established. And maybe, as I said, maybe there's 2 or 3 different kinds of lengths of targets for different types of things that we're looking at. And I think, the wordsmithing thing, I think, can be put aside. The first thing to decide is what do we want in it? What are we trying to do? It's like if you have a lawyer that's working for you doing something, the first thing to do is tell him, what do you want to accomplish? And then let him go off and do the words and music that go through and do that. If I'm just thinking of one recent thing, the drive-through windows, I don't know how long that took, but it took a number of months, practically all the way through the COVID thing when people would want to be using drive-up windows perhaps. But I don't know, those are my comments. I think we need to prioritize. I think we need to figure out what our timing targets are to meet what we think we need to meet the public's demands, and then figure out how we go about doing those things. And it may not be the same solution for each type of priority that we're into.
Thanks, Vaughn. Good points. Jim?
The prioritization for me should be going after anything that has conflicting or ambiguous language in it that could cause us issues. In other words, they pointed out some ordinances that may be in conflict of each other. I think we should go after those first. That could save us any, problems going forward. For example, I know that in the list that Sri had up, there was the PUD agreements, and I'm not sure, do we have any more of those immediately coming at us, or are we past that now, where something else should be what we prioritize first? And the only issue I see where the board isn't aligned at all is this outside storage and use determination. And I think where the board is about 50-50 on these, right now. And I think if we work on that language and get comfortable with it, I think we can get ourselves aligned there as we are in most other projects, just like we were with Kensington Ridge and that. We were all pretty much aligned there. So I believe if Sri and then the legal team with Jennifer tells us what is conflicting, what's ambiguous, and then if we go after this usage variances and stuff like that, that would be my priorities. And then we start plugging through them.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Good points. Mark?
I already gave my input.
Nope, yeah. Anything else that you wanted to add? I just wanted to make sure we touch area because Julie brought up some good points and I don't know if they triggered anything for you.
I do agree you're going to have other work groups or other work streams and of some sort to accomplish what was put before us. I don't see any other way to do it. And in terms of the time commitment that would be required, I'd certainly be willing to support that to the extent possible.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Mark. Neil?
Well, don't we have an update for the master plan next year? How's that going to work into the schedule?
Bill, do you know if we're doing a master plan update next year? Or is it
Supposed to be every 5 years, so 17, 22, right?
That's right. It's next year.
I think
that's going to be interesting to work it in. Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Did Neil have anything else? Julie had her hand up also.
Okay, Julie.
I just was wondering if the master plan has to be updated. Like, I don't think it has to be like thoroughly gone through, and like you can go through it and be like, yep, we like it, we're still on track, and put a new date on it. It doesn't have, I don't think you have to go through a huge rework. It just needs to be looked at, reread, and decided if we still need, if it needs any updates. Am I saying that correctly, Sri?
Yes.
That's correct. It can be reviewed and reaffirmed, and then you don't have to go through the, 1.5-year process of doing that.
Right. So it doesn't have to be a big project.
Correct.
If we like it.
We'll still have to go through public review, correct?
Yes.
It needs a public hearing, but it doesn't have to be a big project.
So that's not a major constraint on this process.
Unless we see that there's something big that needs to be changed.
The future land use plan update, if we wanted to look at if that's in line with existing uses and zoning, that should be a separate process from this, just because that will take some time to review, all the property in the township thoroughly. But that would be the only master plan related item.
Yeah, we've done that once here. We're harmonized both. So,
yeah.
Bill, you got anything else?
I guess if I go back and just take a look at the priorities, and I think some of them have been mentioned, but I think there's a division between things that would take a long time and maybe some low hanging fruit. Sort of like what Jim had said, there's got to be some things there. One that sticks out in my mind is the lighting, high pressure sodium. I don't know if they make that bulb anymore. Signage, we started to talk about it. Lot averaging, Sri, you had indicated different residential avenues, tools in our toolbox to define that. You had indicated cluster, the environmental, but there's also lot averaging. There's been a big push for a long time to reduce the amount of asphalt, land banking, parking. So my point to that is, in these ordinances that are just simply out of date, couldn't we just ask the consultant to come up with the proper text to bring them up to date without changing the overall concept of the ordinance, put that together and just go through them more as a consent type agenda item and just adopt them? These are just really sort of cleaning up. Lighting probably has changed in the last 3 years again, just with the products that are out there. In terms of that, the other things that I think would take a lot longer should be done in 2 meetings with the work session, as Julie suggested. And where we run into problems is that we try to do ordinance adjustment in the same time frame that we do all the other planning issues. So it gets to the end of the meeting and we're tired of it. And the first thing we do as soon as we can is we say, let's give that to the consultant, go back, write something up and come back next month. And go back, come back next month. And pretty soon, you know, it goes on forever and ever just to figure out the real definition of a walk-up window. And sometimes I think that takes a lot. In that situation and other situations, there are reasons that people have asked for these things. Like, same with the service station. That should have been, in my mind, a little bit easier. So maybe if we had the work session, we would drop it off our regular monthly meeting, at least to bring it to a point where all we've got to do is recommend to the board and then go through the adoption process. The other area that is in our text is the Subdivision Act and the subdivision text. And I have not seen a subdivision in all the time I've been on the Planning Commission. So, I mean, maybe there's a state law that says we still have to meet the Subdivision Act, but no one's building subdivisions in our area. But my biggest thing is we still don't have an up-to-date zoning map. We went through all of those issues and all of that realignment with the land use and the zoning. But if you look online right now, you will not see an up-to-date zoning map. And I understand that's in Giffords' hands right now. Is that right?
We are updating that as part of the clear zoning transformation. We got the layers of the recent map amendments.
So can't we do that accelerated so that we can get online an up-to-date zoning map? We have areas that are already built out, have been built out for probably 15 years that are still called extractive.
I can check with our GIS team and then send you an update.
Yeah, why don't we try to move that along? So I think that's good, but it doesn't sound like we're any closer, or well, maybe we've defined the problem, but our website is the most unfriendly ordinance I've ever seen. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any better until the clear zoning is completely done, because it is very hard to use it. The graphics are probably before they even had computerized graphics. So some of that has to be worked out. So those are my thoughts. I guess I have a question for Sri and Eric. Is in most ordinances, there's an appendix. And I mentioned this at the meeting, whether it be LARA's health ordinances, the Fire Bureau, or the International Building Code, there's an appendix. The appendix is not the code, but it's an attempt by code people who make the code, like the International Code Council. And you can go to the appendix and you can get another idea of what it's saying. Do they have that in the planning world? Any other agency that you can just go to and get an interpretation?
I've seen that in Ohio, a lot of Ohio ordinances, but I haven't really found that to be an appendix really in any Michigan ordinances or near here. Yeah, I don't know if like, it would be a good idea to have like a regional or statewide planning or zoning committee that is like a ZBA type of thing for interpretations or something like that. But no, yeah, there's nothing.
Because I've always found that very helpful with Michigan Building Code. Call the code agency, they help you out, as long as you pay your yearly fee. That's all.
That's probably because the building code is universal and then the zoning code is specific to the community. So the zoning interpretations usually are deferred to the ZBA.
You could still do that for state law items like medical marijuana or things like
Right.
that are very heavily state.
Where we don't have to reinvent them. And after it's state law, even, cellular towers. We went through that whole labors on cell towers. And it really comes down it's sort of out of our hands. The FCC defines what it is. You meet those requirements. That's the way the state wants it. If this goes through with mining will be another one. We don't need to regulate that. It's already being regulated for us. So those are my thoughts. I think it's good that we're headed this way. I'm anxious to, see the clear code get in place, because I think it would make it a lot easier. And every time I go to the ordinance, I always find something either on our website that counters our own ordinance. But that's good. That's all I got.
Thanks, Bill. Vaughn, did you have anything more that you wanted to
Well,
say?
the only thing I'd say, I think, and maybe it's too soon to do this, but I think we actually need to lay out a work plan in terms of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and how long it's going to take and what groups are going to have to be formed to do it and what's going to be expected of it and what's going to be expected of whom, what the our consultants are going to do and what we're going to do and what we're going to do together and so on. I just don't think any of us want to just be thrashing around at one at a time, not knowing what else we need to be doing or what's next. And because it's a major project doing this, right? And I think we need to really understand where we're going and how we're going to get there.
I think I agree. If we don't have a concise work plan, this is never going to happen.
Right, right.
Miles, any last comments? Miles.
Oh.
One thing I was kind of arguing with myself about is if it belongs on here is performance bonds. I just had an interesting experience with that, and I've never seen us talk about that. Is that something that should be brought forward?
So performance bonds are handled administratively, generally through, there are provisions in your code, but they're handled through either the building department or the supervisor's office. Performance bonds Tim usually handles them in connection with permitting.
Okay, great.
But the township does require performance bonds for almost all of its projects.
Okay, good, because we should, and I never heard much about it, so wonderful. Yeah. I like what both Neil and Vaughn said about let's have a plan and break out teams and subcommittees and get to work.
I agree with you 1,000%. Jim, any comments?
No additional from what I said earlier.
Okay, thanks. Dave, anything else?
Nothing additional.
Okay. One of the questions I had for Cherie is in the process of doing this clear zone thing, I know a lot of our ordinances are written and they reference other ordinances or other sections or things like that. Is part of the cleanup process to make sure that those things walk and talk and they all harmonize? Because again, I think what Bill's problem is that it's very unfriendly. But if we go online with this, and I think it's a great idea, I want to make sure that it really is a giant step forward, and when it references something, it's very consistent, and again, we need to clean up lighting and signage and a lot of other things. But yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't sure. Do you want me to respond?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what the clear zoning does is it divides the language into use standards and site standards. And then you have the zoning districts, which talks about different uses. So it does have clickable links. Like if you're talking about a drive-through, if somebody goes to business district, clicks on drive-through, then it takes them to the standards. But if there's an existing conflict in language, clear zoning doesn't fix it, because we need to go through the amendment process to clean up the conflicting regulations. Like if the open storage says you need 6-foot screen wall, and then the landscape ordinance says you can screen it with trees, that kind of conflict we will identify, but we cannot change it. Even though I'm so tempted to change it, we cannot change it using the transformation. It has to go through the process of public hearing and all that. But I have a few comments I wanted to share, but I'll go after you're done.
I think we've got everybody to comment, and I think we've gotten some good comments and some good follow-ups. I think that I think the subcommittee to try to address these things real time with Giffords Webster is really important, and I'll work really hard on that. And I'm ready to put in as much time as I have to, because obviously I'm a lot more flexible than many of you guys are and ladies. Jennifer, do we have to keep that down to 4 or less, or because we don't want a quorum, right?
Well, your planning commission is 9, so your quorum would be 5.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you want the composition of the ad hoc to be. You know, you could have more than just like 4 members of the planning commission. You could have Tim and Shri and, you know, maybe a township board member or whatever, but
Okay.
no more than 4 from the planning commission and no more than 3 from the board if you're going to combine those 2.
Okay, that's what I need. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's something, again, it's something that's absolutely necessary that you do right away, because we have a lot of things that are, you know, that are getting mission critical for us. So I'm hoping that we can do that as quickly as we can. At this time, are we done with the conversation? Shri, are you satisfied? Eric?
I think I got what I was looking for, but I do have some follow-up questions.
Okay, we can do those in the follow-up when we get down to the consultant's comments and things, if that's okay. Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah, whatever you see.
Well, tonight, shouldn't we just pick the top 3 we want to work on and then set up a date in the future for a review with the committee, and then a date when they should be finalized to the board?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, Neil. I can't see why we couldn't pick the top 3, or at least ballot. Do you have a top 3 that you'd like to suggest? Wendy, can
Well,
you?
it gets to the point, do we want to do 3 easy ones to get started, or a mix of easy and hard?
Maybe we can do one of each, you know?
Exactly. So if we just do a top 2, that would be fine. We just need to kick off the process with a plan, people, and dates.
Okay. What have you got in mind? You know, for your hard one, easy one.
Well, the easy one's going to be lighting, right?
Yep. Hard one.
I'm open.
Okay.
I would say probably open storage would be another one.
Open storage. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify a conversation at the township board last night. One, open storage, they've already said, talk about open storage. So that's going to be on your agenda for your meeting next week, the M2 open storage, because the board directed that last night. But then when the conversation came up about your ad hoc committee, I suggested that you guys would have a conversation about how you wanted that body to be composed. And then you would obviously present that to the township board for their kind of approval of how you would move that committee forward. So I think maybe your discussion tonight could kind of come up with a rough idea of how you want that body composed so that idea can be presented to the board.
I think that's a good point, Jennifer. But I think it would be really good if we went in there with an idea of how we wanted it structured, but also what was in terms of the planning commission, what are our heavy hitters? You know, what do we want to talk about? So I think Neil's point of doing a hard one and an easy one, storage and lighting, and I think we can do that. And then I think it'd probably be a good idea to probably try to come up with 3 or 4 people from the planning commission, and then we can discuss it from there and figure out who we want from probably Giffords and Webster and Tim for sure. Tim's always a great resource. And we can go on like that. But for starters, I'd just like to get a sense of where the rest of the commissioners are in terms of one hard one and one easy one. Dave.
So to be honest, I would like to hear from Giffords and Webster as to what their suggestions are, what they think our top hitters should be, because they've recently done the audit and they probably have an idea of what is most pressing.
Okay. All right. That's a thought. Vaughn?
Well, it seems to me that outside storage and use determination, and I know they're not minor, but I come back to the minor things like lighting and stuff. Why do I would think the consultants can go through that, things like that, and I don't necessarily think you need an ad hoc committee to be doing that. Now maybe we do. It's just my reactions. I'd use the ad hoc committees to be doing outside storage and use determination and that kind of a thing. I also wonder, and maybe I'm overstepping here, but why do we have to go to the board to ask the board if we can have 2 or 3 of our planning commission members get together with a couple of the consultants to hash out something? Is that something that has to go back to the board, or does not the planning commission have the authority to say, hey, we've got these major things and we want to work on them, and this is, and it may change from time to time. I'm a little confused on that.
So legally, you have the authority to do that, but the discussion last night was, and at our administrative committee meeting earlier this week, was that, the township board was going to be involved in how the planning commission was going to set up its ad hoc review or its review committee. So
but that was talking about the review of, things like major developments and so on. And we've got a lot on our list here that aren't major developments. They're just regular ordinances that we're trying to struggle with to see how we bring them into what we think they should be. That's not a major development. And that's why I say we may have 2 or 3 different kinds of groups or structures to work on these things, and with different timelines. But I may be missing something. But
the planning commission could set up its own committees, and it doesn't need township board approval to do that. It's just you need to decide how you want to approach that.
Yeah, I almost don't even see them as committees. I see them as work groups for particular items. But anyway,
asking Bill or Jennifer, are we, by contacting Giffords and Webster or Jennifer yourself, are we committing funds that the township board would want to make sure that we are using those funds appropriately when we just contact these people? Or is that why we need to have the board approval on some of this stuff?
Yes, that was the major reason for involving the board, was that
You froze, Bill. Oh no. You're frozen, Bill.
thing that we have to tell them. We just,
There you go. Now, you were frozen for a while. Do you want to go back and restate?
I think he's frozen again.
He's frozen again.
Bill, there you go. Bill, you're going to have to give us maybe a voice without picture.
just did that. So I can see my internet go away. So I think that would be something we could probably, go ahead and set up the work sessions, let the board know. But if these are compensated meetings, then we'd have to make sure that they understand that.
Don't we have to,
What I was asking, Bill, just to make sure it's clear, is if we involve like Giffords and Webster or legal in any of these questions, are we generating billable hours that we should have approval of ahead of time. And not, I don't mean just, I'm not talking about anything else. I was talking about those two things. We've got to be very cognizant of.
So I'd have to go, I would think, yes, we're going to get billable hours. Jennifer?
Well, I feel like the township board approved the clear zoning and the zoning audit. So in connection with that is the work that's going to need to be done. And they recognize that because they've approved those projects.
Right.
And so utilizing legal counsel, and the township board's also the body that directed me to attend planning commission meetings. So they understand I'm going to have some participation in your planning issues. And that, I mean, the administration is actively involved in both, and I'm speaking on behalf of Giffords Webster here a little bit, but I know just because I work with them every day, the administration is actively involved in us doing the work. We don't just go do the work. We have to touch base with the administration and make sure that that's appropriate. So the administration kind of takes its lead from the township board and then directs us accordingly.
I think it'd be good just to let them know our plans.
Doesn't hurt though. It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't hurt to be open. So.
Yeah.
Don't we need a work plan then so that we can show them what we're doing?
Well, I think we still need to go back and try to figure out what our priority list is.
Yeah.
Why don't we just go ahead and, I always find that if you're going to enter into something like that, it's best just to go ahead and set up a schedule.
Yeah.
So, instead of, like we do with our planning commission meeting and everything else, I mean, could we just come back and say the second Thursday of every month, we will meet in a work group? And
Okay with that. I mean, I don't have a problem. I think we need to pick who's going to be on there and who can actually make it consistently.
Well, I think the work group should include anybody that can make it to that meeting. That's not the ad hoc committee. That's just a work group.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Well, so you have to have, even a work group is considered an open meeting. So you have to, depending on how you want to structure that work session, it needs to be properly noticed. So
Right.
I need to understand, is it going to be the entire planning commission? There needs to be, the legal notices are different for each type of open meeting. So I just need to understand that.
So if it were a work session open to the planning commission as a body, that's 18-hour notice.
Yes.
So, and I mean, that's something that could be done by just noticing it just like any other meeting. I would
Right.
just feel comfortable having when we get into the ad hoc committee, the only purpose of that was to talk about issues before we walk into a planning commission meeting and get broadsided.
Right.
Or not know anything about it, or where did it come from, or how in the world, or why are we looking at this? That was the purpose of the ad hoc committee. Now, if we're going to have work sessions, I would like to hear from everybody. And I'm not expecting everybody to make every one of them, but we don't expect that at a planning commission meeting. So I would say invite everybody, set up an 18-hour notice, and go ahead with that.
And we could just have it topic specific. And that will focus everybody on what we're going to address at that meeting, and then have our work sessions scheduled, topic by topic.
And maybe one of the first things is to come up with a work plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got to have a work plan. It's going to flounder. We can do the small ones and the big ones, but I really think the first thing is to come up with a plan.
Right.
How do you want to do that, Bill? I mean, I was trying to figure out, what the heavy hitters were in terms of the other commissioners, but I can't seem to get there. So you want a work plan, but around what? Obviously storage is going to be part of that. PUDs are going to be a part of that. There's going to be some other things, but what is it? How are we going to establish that if we don't canvass people and decide what we want to do tonight, and then set the meetings up and come up with set up a work plan around a specific topic?
So I'd like to refer back to our consultants to help us with the work plan.
Okay.
They're familiar with the audit that they just went through. They can prioritize as Sheree had on that one list, what's important, and we can add to that. We can probably cluster up all the low hanging fruit pretty quickly, which is either a conflict in the text or just an outdated ordinance. But those are, would Giffords and Webster be willing to take on that and help us with the work plan? Sheree, Eric?
Okay, I wasn't sure what's the right time to respond. That was the whole intent of this meeting, to gather your thoughts. And then when we come back with the final draft, there will be a work plan in the audit that identifies, okay, based on the planning commission discussion, these are the high priority items. These are the items that are not priority, but easy to address. And then these are the items we need to get at some point. And then the idea is that maybe we can take that priority list and take it to the board for discussion. And then if board agrees with the order, then we can have a work session to identify, the subcommittees, who will be on the subcommittees, what's the timeline, and then set up a process. So I think trying to determine the committees and the timeline and the members before we have a work plan might be, is not recommended. So from your, I think I'm pretty clear on what the priorities are based on this discussion, so we can come up with a draft implementation list, and then we can have a work session to identify the process and stuff, and then we can present that to the board. And then if board just approves the list at once, then we don't have to go to board to get approval for each amendment. That also makes the process quicker.
So how long do you think it would take to get us into that position?
That's the only page that's left in the audit, so I can get it to you in the next meeting.
Well, what if you put that page back up that had like the 8 items on it, why don't we just go there and say, well, let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and say, prioritize them now. Vote on it if we have to.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so from what I gathered, outside storage is already making progress. It will come to you before, so that's always definitely top one. And then the development review process would be step 2, because that's the item where we would determine who the subcommittees are, what the process, are we going to have a second meeting, all that stuff, and the bylaws and everything. That's the other item. And then the signs, we already have a memo prepared, so that's the other one. Parking and lighting and landscape standards, that could be one of those quicker ones Commissioner Mazzara was referring to, because they are, we have tried and tested ordinance standards we worked on for other communities. We can, so we can present that language pretty easily without, which is very straightforward. And then we have planned unit developments. I know we don't have any in the works at the moment, but we do have a couple of sites in the township that could qualify for flexible development. Maybe not a commercial mixed use, but just a residential, flexible residential development. So this is the list I gathered from what you have. So you can probably pick and choose what's high priority, and then give us some guidance, and then I can put that table together and then get the audit back to you quickly.
I think what's happening here, at least what I'm hearing, is that Julie started out talking about the frustration of moving things through the planning commission and getting them to board for their consideration. With respect to ordinances and trying to get this clear zoning done. But at the same time, what we've done now is we've gone right back to where we were, and that we've got this process, and you can get back to us next week about it and everything else like that. And what we're trying to do is pick something, at least what I heard Julie say, and I could be wrong, pick something like Used to
Call
turn.
on Julie. She's had her hand up for a really long time.
Well, go ahead, George. I'm sorry. I'm trying to speak for you and I apologize. Please speak for yourself.
That's okay. So, I just meant that when we do, when we get into the nitty gritty of doing the ordinance amendments, that's when we take a long time. But this, the way that Sri has presented it, where we get the list of items and then get it to the board, and we don't have to go back and forth. So that problem's taken care of. She has this, and then she already said that next week she'll have a list of the what'd you call it, the work process, or I can't remember the name of the other, you called it, Sri. But then, so next week, or yeah, is that next week? Next week. Is it next week, Sri, that you can get us the work schedule?
The 27th, we have the next planning commission meeting.
Yeah,
right?
and on our agenda we have the zoning ordinance audit. Is that where you can give us the work thing? I don't want to push you. That's a week. So I don't know if you.
Oh, no, it's a pretty quick thing. I can get something to you Monday or Tuesday, but I don't know if that's enough time for your discussion on the planning commission.
Right.
Next meeting.
You've already determined our high priority items. We all agree with those high priority items. They go to the board, they say yes, and then we move along. My question is to Bill, I feel like we're talking about two different things. Like I said, to have 2 meetings a month. Is that what you mean by work session? Because in the work session or our other meeting a month is when we work on the ordinance amendments. And then our regularly scheduled meeting is when we work on our projects, when I say projects, I mean like
the site plan, regular items.
Yes, crossings of Milford, Kensington Ridge, Milford Mile, Consumers Energy, Jeff Building Co., all those things that are coming up. So we don't lose track of this and get tired at the end of our meeting. And then like how you said, Bill, move along. So Bill, what I'm hearing you say is that you are suggesting, and tell me if I'm wrong, you're suggesting that we do the second meeting a month to work on this, like I said, and then also to have an ad hoc that meets before meetings to get further information. Will you explain?
Yes, I think the ad hoc would be a quick meeting before our normally scheduled planning commission meetings. And then on the second meeting would be a work session that would be the second meeting of the month. And so what I'm suggesting is we've already notified everybody of our typical planning commission meetings. Before the planning commission meeting, the ad hoc group meets with them to get a better understanding, or if there is any questions. And like Eric said, it may not be every meeting that we need that. But then in the middle, the second Thursday of every month is a work session so that we can get things accomplished and move them on. So when they move on, I believe then they would have to come back to the planning commission meeting so that they can recommend to the township board. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think we're talking the same thing. I think that was.
Yes, I think we are.
We were saying the same thing. But Sri, I love this. I love the items I put of priority. I think they're great. If you can get us that work thing, and then we're off and running.
Thank you. I do have one question I meant to ask. I know we talked about 2 different committees back and forth. There's ad hoc, the one you just talked about. I feel like the goal for each committee is different. The way it was referenced to ad hoc is just site plan reviews or the items that are on the agenda on that particular day. And then the other subcommittee is more like an ordinance review committee that's focused on just discussing ordinance language. Right?
So just so I understand how I'm supposed to direct the clerk's office to do legal announcements, if you're having a work session regularly every month, even if the topic varies, then they'll change your regular schedule of meetings. So if that's your intention, I need to direct them a certain way. And then your ad hoc review committee might also need to be noticed depending on how many members you're anticipating be a part of that.
On the ad hoc committee that we spoke of at the administrative meeting we had, we said that we were going to keep that to just a few planning commission members so that they could come back out into the meeting and make answer questions and that from the rest of the planning commission.
Okay.
That was the whole purpose of the ad hoc committee. And so there was not a quorum, just 2 or 3 people and Tim, so that we understand what we're looking at and why it's on our agenda.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was really clear about that so I know how to tell the clerk to post the meetings.
We can provide brief description of the committees in the audit. Something to consider if we don't have any, it's a question for Tim, but if we don't have any site plans on the agenda next week, if we want to push that meeting a week after so that we can get some information on these, how these committees work in other communities, and then the final draft of the audit. That way, the Planning Commission will also have longer time to review the updated material before the meeting.
So the only problem with that is that's a regular meeting. That's a regular
We've
schedule.
already advertised.
Yeah.
We've advertised that meeting and we've told applicants, sorry, you didn't meet the deadline for that meeting.
Plus the
You're
township.
not on the agenda till next month, so.
I can turn the documents around, but that would only give the Planning Commission maybe 1 or 2 days before 27th meeting. That's my only concern.
Sheree, you're still sharing the screen.
Oh, sorry.
So if you wanted to change the date of next week's meeting, because it's a regular scheduled meeting, you'd have to open the meeting and then postpone it, which I'm sure you probably don't want to do. Plus, the township board last night asked that the M2 outdoor storage be addressed at next week's meeting. So.
Oh, I'm not suggesting, I'm just.
And the supervisor sent that email out this morning to George and I. So it's going to be on the agenda.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to confuse everybody. All I was trying to confirm is that if you want to discuss the audit implementation on the 27th meeting, you probably will only have 1 or 2 days to review the packet, I would send.
Okay.
Can I interject here, please, Mr. Chair? Thank you. So the packet has already gone out to you folks. And so whatever Sheree would be sending to you, you would receive the email. There would not be any hard copies delivered.
Good.
I'm okay with that.
That works.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to allow the planning consultant to wind things up for us a bit.
I kind of got a head start on that. I think so. The game plan is for the May 27th meeting. I'm gonna email the final implementation chart recommendation for you to consider that list the 3 different types of priority items so that you guys can make a recommendation to the board or you guys can determine when you want to have the work session to come up with a further plan or other strategies. So I will send that to you either Monday or Tuesday.
So in terms of process, that'll go to Wendy, and Wendy will then distribute that to all the planning commission meeting
Yes, that is correct.
members. Okay, good.
There was one more. Let me look at my notes. Okay, I think that was it.
Okay. Planning commissioners, final comments. Mark? Any?
No, nothing more. Thank you.
Okay, Neil?
I think we've covered enough.
Jim?
Just quick one is, we were talking about the second Tuesday or second Thursday of the month. That's the day after the zoning thing, or all the computers going to be back, and that is that an issue? I mean, I don't have an issue picking it up. Is that just going to be an issue in general?
Well, for me, it won't be an issue.
For me, it won't be. Okay, Dave,
Thing else.
let's see, Miles.
At the risk of irritating people, I think we're still going slow. This isn't that hard, you know, but since it's only 1 week, okay, let's do this. But let's come away next week in just several minutes of talking with a plan.
I agree with you, Miles. Vaughn?
I agree. I agree with what Miles said.
Yep. Julie?
I'm good.
You're good, Bill?
I think I've covered everything. Thank you, Eric and Sherry. It's a good presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Miles Neil's seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are standing adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Good
Good
job.
night.
Good night, all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.